we'll get things rolling right away. It's 5:30.
And Stephanie just joined and Beth.
Okay.
Somebody just named Beth.
Is that Principal Lorge? Maybe.
Not sure.
Well, so it's January 7th. Happy New Year, everyone. It's 5:30. This is a special meeting of the SVUESD, primarily to discuss the upcoming budget. We'll jump right into our agenda, which begins with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would invite folks, if they so choose, to stand and join with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next to the public comments, and Director Gordon, we don't have anyone participating online.
I do have security features set, so if anybody is from the public that wants to comment, you could just raise your hand. I can request you to be unmuted. And Stephanie, that goes for you to, actually, I'll have you unmute, but I might have to keep toggling you back on and off.
Okay.
No hands.
Thank you. And as there's no one here present at the meeting for public comment, we'll move right into agenda item 3, which is the budget review. So Director Gordon, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to kind of go through an abbreviated version of what we've been through before, just to kind of highlight the changes from last time. The full packet is up on the website. Those of you that are here in the room with me, I have only printed a few pages of what I'm going to cover tonight, but the whole thing is up there online for everybody's access. So changes from draft 1, I have highlighted in the narratives in blue italics. We did have some updates in staffing. We had some vacancies when we had draft 1. Those positions have since been filled. So I went ahead and adjusted those salaries and benefits for those folks. So those are making some of the changes that you're seeing. The salary and benefits lines. And I also went through and made sure that we didn't have any other factors for unknowns. So making sure that, the health insurance, basically have everything set at what the proposed rates have been from VHI to the Department of Financial Regulation. Since I've been in this position, DFR has always approved the rates that VHI proposes. So if they increase, then we're going to be short, but it hasn't happened yet. And typically, we can always go back to the drawing board if we have time before we have to warn this. But again, it hasn't happened, and we should be hearing probably from the Department of Financial Regulation pretty soon on those rates. So that, and then also the dental rates were flat. There were a couple of spots that still had an increased factor in there, so I removed those again. So those are adding to the reduction that you're seeing in the benefits line from draft 1. And then the only other change I believe that you'll see is on the assessment. So the SVSU board approved their budget on December 17th, I believe. And then I've taken the current version of long-term weighted average daily membership, which at this point is still quote unquote preliminary version 3. But we basically have to lock it down. So that's what I went ahead and posted online today. So the assessments are, the budget's final, the assessments are set, that has been updated, and that is it is the biggest driving factor in what the overall increase is that you're seeing. So those are the only changes from draft 1. So everything else that was proposed, requested, cut before, everything else is still the same.
Let me try to get in.
That gives us an overall budgeted expenditures of $33,378,598, or an 11.1% increase. So that the other thing that's in your packet, I included again, is the staffing, the FTE counts. That is, again, that's page 8 for those of you at home looking at the whole packet. On the revenue side, I also went through and revised some numbers here. Looking at the current students that we have tuitioning in, and what I'm projecting that we probably will have from announced tuition, which we have to do next week. So assuming all those students come back next year, we'll have tuition coming in of $363,000, which is an increase of $69,000 over the current budget. Interest rates are not coming down as quickly as we thought they were going to, so I'm pretty comfortable with upping the budget to $100,000 for interest, considering what we've been looking at. You know, last year we had $325,000 in interest income, so I bumped that up. And I think the other ones remain the same. So all that being said, the general state support grant, which is what I highlight all the time, this is what our demand on the education fund is an increase of 16.5%. And the reason I point this out is because this is what's going to drive our tax rates, right? Another thing that I wanted to mention, which I may have before, is that when the tax commissioner gave up their December 1st letter, it includes information that they were using an average increase statewide of 6.1% in education spending. So we're well above that with this budget here. Again, it's a statewide system. So I have other districts right now that are significant reductions. But then I have some that are hovering at that between 6 to 8%, you know, this one being 16. If everybody is well over that 6% mark, the legislature is going to have to do something different when they set that property yield number. And we can look at that too, but I just want to point that out, that because we're over that, we're on the other side of the spectrum, which could be pushing things not in our favor when the legislature actually goes to set that rate. Also too, I very broad brush, to bring that down 1%, we'd have to cut $250,000 out of the budget. Okay. Is it too early to ask you a question? Let me just get through the rest of it, and then we'll open it up and answer everything I possibly can. So the long-term weighted average daily membership, we talked about this briefly before, because we're a union elementary district and our secondary students are in Mount Anthony, we have to blend the tax rates proportionately between each district and by each town. So the numbers that you see on the top of page 15, what I have up here on the screen by town, showing you in black the estimated long-term weighted average daily membership by town for the elementaries, and then in blue is for the secondary. And then for each of those towns, we take those proportions and apply it to the relative budget. So the current draft of the Mount Anthony budget right now has their education spending at just over 32 million. And their education spending per long-term weighted ADM puts that at 11,051. For the SVUESD, we're at 12,645. And just for some perspective, the threshold for excess spending is $15,000. It's almost $16,000. So we're not even in the neighborhood of being in that realm of hitting that excess spending threshold. The homestead property yield. So this is the number that the legislature sets in the spring after they collect basically all of the budget data, because by then they'll know what budgets have passed, which budgets haven't passed, what that true demand on the education fund is going to be. They'll be able to look at what revenue sources they have to put into the ed fund. And then the yield is basically the lever that they use to kind of generate what they're going to raise in taxes. So based on everything that the tax commissioner had at that point in time for the December 1st letter, they came out with a yield of 85.53. Now, this number has already been adjusted by that new statewide adjustment figure, which has been finalized. It came in at 72.36%. So if that, I will run through a scenario so you can see what it would be like if that law hadn't gone into effect. It's a wash. There's no impact. I know why they did it. They have said that it's because they want to smooth the impact of CLA on the tax rates. But it doesn't matter because it's a wash either way. So with that being the yield, when we mesh the two school districts together proportionately and then compare them to this year, our increases or decreases over the current year, which is numbered as line 14 on the sheet. Overall, the increases are substantially lower than what the expenditure budget is and what our demand on the education fund is going to be. So Bennington, with all things being considered and as they are now with the current version of NDU, current version of SVUESD, Bennington would be looking at a 1.3% increase over their current tax rate, which is just under 2 cents. Pownell is a 6.3% increase, Shaftesbury is 0.7%, and Woodford 2.4%.
It's going so high.
It's because of the number, it's your proportion of students. So you have 55, almost 56% of the students are at the elementary level. So because our education spending per student is higher at the elementary level, you have a greater portion of that. Whereas Mount Anthony, come back up here, sorry, jumping around. So the education spending per long-term weighted ADM for the SVUESD, you can see that is the same across the board. So 12,645. Mount Anthony is only 11,051. So on those other towns, for Bennington and Shaftesbury, the majority of their students are at the secondary level. And then that final factor that comes into play is the CLA. And Pownell's CLA is down to 70%, but then we bump back that CLA, the 72.36%, which then bumps it up to 97.94. So I don't know if you can see the screen very well or not, but so if this statewide adjustment was not in effect this year, it would be basically multiplying by 1 or multiplying by 100%. So the homestead property yield would have been 11,820. And then if you see down here, CLA adjustments then end up being the numbers that they are. And the tax rate changes are exactly the same. So it's a complete wash. And another way to look at it real quickly is so this was a slide that I had in the workshop. So this is an excerpt from the VSA, VSBA, VASBO budget thing that came out this year. The new statewide average CLA calculation works like this, right? So when we look at it mathematically, district spending per pupil divided by that homestead yield with the CLA, so that's that 85.53 number, divided by the local CLA with the statewide adjustment. So dividing that, we know that it's the same thing as multiplying by the inverse. So I just flip the statewide CLA with the local CLA there on the right side. And if you cancel out, that basically gets us right back to the original equation. So they're just making it more complicated,
Hmm.
but it's having no impact on the tax rate itself. So with that. And the only other thing that's actually not part of the budget packet, but is in the packet online and in your paper packet is the enrollment numbers for today. As of today.
I can see it in the room. Yeah, and we always close.
Yep.
Which is very. One figure.
It's based on household income and families receiving services for the low income determinations. Sandy, I know you've had questions.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, Renee.
And I know.
Thank you for doing all of this. I'm kind of a little surprised, I guess, about the new statewide adjustment, meaning nothing.
Yeah.
It balanced out.
So in that, it's like an 8 or I don't know, 9, 10, 12-page document that's shared to local school officials. It does say in the common level appraisal, ultimately the tax rates will not change with this state law, but it's just a way for, I guess, the public or, you know, even us, because I've said it in the past myself, like, yeah, I mean, our CLAs have dropped tremendously. It's because our property values in comparison to market value
Yeah, since COVID.
haven't caught up. But basically, our grand list is low. We have to generate more money because our property values are low. So that CLA then brings up your tax rate. Now, if you think about it, once they reappraise our properties,
That's what we need.
our grand list is gonna go up.
Yeah.
So the tax rates are gonna come down. It's all relative,
Yeah.
right? So our CLAs will come back up, then the tax rates will level out too.
We'll do first.
So if I heard you correctly, if I understood you correctly, 16,000 is about what the per pupil spending limit is. That's the cap.
Is
the
before
excess
before you end up in the excess spending, $15,926. Yes,
And we're under that.
yes.
So what is that what is the lowest number where it goes against us? What does that number look like?
It would be the 8553.
Okay, so that,
So that would really make our, I can pull it back up. Essentially, if we were spending that much money per weighted student, then the tax rate would be $1.
okay. And if I understood you also, you shared that in order for this to be less than this 11% increase, that you would have to cut, not you, but there would have to be cuts made about $250,000. Is that correct? Okay. So, and this may not be a question for you, but again, I'd like to know about this CSTAG position at $112,000 and what and this you may not have the answer, but what is the hope of this position for this school? Is this, if I understand, this wasn't part of the original?
It was.
Oh, it was part of the original.
And it's on page 8 of your FTE, we do have it highlighted as a requested 1.0 HHP CSTAG coordinator at Mount Stark. That's hazing, harassment, bullying, and Glenn helping you out, sees.
Comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines.
So is that a person that does the guidelines that oversees the guidelines?
Basically, it's a form that you fill out when there is, a
So
presentation of the school.
yeah, it's a position that was actually introduced at the middle school, may have been last year, and it's been very successful. So every time there's a complaint, there has to be an investigation. And it's taking a lot of time of the administrators and their staff to do those investigations follow up with the paperwork.
Thread this one side, the HHB is another, that involves Title IX, involves.
So this person
So
is taking care of those pieces, or that piece.
Right.
Would this fall under social services? So,
I view it as a support role to the administration of the school
so yes,
because it ultimately, and that was Chris McGuire, his, role as principal at the middle school. He was finding that his assistant principals were not able to do the work that he needed them to do because they were caught up in having to do these investigations so often. So it was actually Superintendent Culkeen asked me to put this in. I don't see the requests and how many issues there are, but I think it must have elevated to a point where he felt it would have been or would be beneficial to the school to have that position there.
So it isn't just the reporting like a Swiss report would do, it's actually talking and investigating.
Yeah, and could be getting authorities involved if
Yeah.
necessary.
Got it.
In theory, we could use it in others. We could use it as a resource for other schools.
Certainly.
That's what my question
Yeah.
would be, is,
But-
should it become shared,
Right,
should it arise?
but this one's specific to Molly.
It's one big budget though, so I mean, I did question that, like, should I put it in that school or should I put it in the district-wide column? He said, leave it at Molly. I think that's probably based on numbers of issues or instances
And there's only one, even though it says add one, this would be the first
for this district.
for this district.
Yes.
To follow up on Glenn's, so, but is this for student issues, or when you say Title IX, are we talking about broader, like, is it?
This, to my experience, has been solely student-based.
Okay.
That you'd be surprised the amount of things that become uncovered during these investigations, the time that they take.
No, yeah, that's fine.
That they-
No, not surprised.
Yeah.
You know, my wife did Title IX stuff at the college levels, you know,
I mean, we also do have our equity administrator too, so if there were like more staff, she may get involved with that thing, but it's kind of out of my realm.
Got about that position.
Busy.
is new superintendent stuff folded into this?
No, the superintendent's an SU employee.
Okay.
But yes, so all the costs of the supervisory union are built into this. So it's on line 10, your assessments.
Yep.
So that includes business office, HR, technology, student services. A big chunk of that is going to be your early education and special education staffing and supports, as well as operations, transportation.
To follow up on Sandy stuff, if it comes to looking towards the 250, where, I mean, historically, like, where do people start to go first?
I mean, I think what we've asked is, we've sent it back to principals. I think building administrators, like, tell us what you can what you can slide through. I mean, to hear that, $250,000 is only going to account for 1%, that's an awful lot of cutting that we would need to do. What, generally speaking, sort of looking at the budget presentation as a whole, how palatable do you think this will be to folks? Understanding, probably the residents of Pownell, the ones that would be most difficult to convince to get on board. So just let's have a general conversation about that. How can we as a board support this budget moving forward?
On the one hand, it comes well below that threshold. And if I remember correctly, if you get too low, then as a school, because then you're not spending it. But we're not anywhere near that piece. But we're also not on the upper end of being over that or near that 16,000. Is that per people?
Well, something, yeah.
Which the middle of the road.
It's tough because we had a 10%, 9% salary increase, so you can't touch that because it's contracted.
Mhm.
The benefits is 11% for healthcare. right there. So I mean, the only thing that really jumped up on was the assessment, which is SVSU stuff. And supplies, but.
The other things I'd like to bring up is there will be needed to match and exceed the need of services that ESSER money used to cover, COVID money used to cover, and we're managing that. And I don't want to negate that 11% is not a big number,
Mhm.
but we are meeting the needs of the students without that dramatic of an impact, given the loss of all those
Yep.
governmental funds that we all became accustomed to.
And we knew, like, we
I
knew this
look
was
at
coming.
that as a,
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, Glenn. But we knew this was coming. We knew that this year would be the shock.
we knew it was
Right?
coming.
This would be, if there was going to be any year that was a shock, this was the year. But I agree, like this is less of a shock than
We
I
have
was
a
anticipating.
community in great need of these services. We're doing ourselves a disservice, our staffs a disservice if we don't address them. You know, because if the community doesn't function, we're not gonna get newer people here. We're gonna retain staff. We're not, you know, I mean, there's 100 things. We could go on and on about the not quality.
I think what we were finally seeing, and particularly in some of the schools that we've been most concerned about in recent years, we're starting to see shifts, positive shifts in those schools. And I think that is related certainly to a number of factors, but getting good services in those classes, in those schools is a huge part of that. And I think we should continue to support that. So I suppose the question is, are we as a board comfortable with advancing this budget and warning it as it is?
Can I share just something real quick?
Please.
I mean, easy places to pull from right away, I would say would be line 13, transfer, which is $130,000 that annually we're putting into a reserve fund. So if you flip to page 3 of the narrative, that very bottom section, you can see what our current balances are in the reserve funds right now.
Do you see any big projects? I always think of Tamale because it's an older school that it feels like there's always something needed.
We had a pretty significant jump in the budget for facilities maintenance in this year. What Holly gave me was almost $750,000 more next year, but Mr. Culkin said that's level funds. So that could be another place that we could look to pull back, given that you have hundreds of thousands of dollars in reserves. So essentially, so let me back up for just 1 second. So before the union district formed, the 4 individual districts all had their own reserve funds. So once we came together as a union, we respectfully kept each of those funds dedicated to those schools individually. I think to date, Bennington is the only one that's actually accessed those funds. I think we put a roof on at Monument a year or 2 ago. And there may have been another roof repair someplace that we accessed. So that the 53,262 can only be used for Molly, Benel, or Monument. The Pownell 254,000 ended up being a combination because of the bus sinking fund and their capital fund. It all got rolled in, so that money can only be used for Pownell and respectively Shaftesbury and Woodford. Since the union formed, we've been putting $130,000 into a joint reserve fund that the board can choose to use however it wants. But there was 1 year,
And that's
that's the 520, so that's been growing year after year. There was 1 year that we decided that we were kind of in a pinch and we decided not to fund it that following year. So that's one easy spot.
Can I ask a follow-up question there
Sure.
that I think you answered, but just to clarify, like if we were to go back, say 3 or 4 years, how much are we pulling out of these reserve funds? Either
We haven't touched any except Bennington.
That's what I thought you said. I just wanted to-
Yeah.
Just while we're on the same subject, I look at it as today's $130,000 is not next year's $130,000.
Mhm.
And with the way that interest rates are trending, we might be doing ourselves a disservice. I'm just putting it out there as a consideration. You know, does that 130 cost us 145 next year to
Right.
replace it?
So,
Brings us down
I'm
half
not
a percentage.
I
point,
do not
but
know
it-
the
yeah.
answer, but I do want to ask the question.
and second question, is that in some type of management fund,
Is it already?
the 520 or?
It's just in our general fund. So it's,
We get no interest?
we are earning interest. So it is contributing, like when you see these earnings, so, you know, $325,000 that we earned in interest last year. Those funds are contributing to that because they're not in separate cash accounts. They're all in the general fund. But then the other easy pickings would be the contingency line as well. That wouldn't have any impact on staffing or the new requested position or, you know, any of the projects that Holly will be able to do with the funds that she'll have available, same amount of money
Mhm.
next year. So just wanted to offer that. And before I yield back, just a quick heads up, because this will probably be on your agenda for next week. Ben Al's camera system has almost entirely failed. So Tech is working on putting an RFP together. He's hoping to have that out tomorrow. And we could access reserve funds to cover it. They're thinking worst case scenario, $120,000. Those things are going to be much less than that. But the proposal will come together. They'll come back to you, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is coming down the pike. Ideally, they'd love to get it done for February break, but that might mean we would have to have a special meeting end of January, beginning of February to award that bid. If not, it could be done over April break. So
Every
just-
time we're together, it's special.
Uh,
So,
So
and
just
you'll have 3 bids, correct?
He hopes.
yeah, I mean, that's.
Reach out to 3 people.
So
See if we get 3 bids.
that's, sorry.
Good to know.
This is like a new person question, but like the easy pickings of the contingency, can you like, what's that? Easy pickings to get rid of, but what, talk to me about why we're keeping it.
Again, since I've been in this role, we haven't had to access that money.
Okay.
It's kind of a culmination actually of money that we used to have in the individual districts. So I think BSD probably used to budget $50,000. I think Benel budgeted, or not Benel, I'm sorry, Pownell was either 50 or $30,000. Every district kind of had their own, like, what if? What if we have a bubble that comes in and we need to hire a teacher that we didn't think we needed to? I mean, $210,000 would certainly cover it. And back in the day, 30,000 wouldn't have, but it would have helped some.
We put in 35,000 a year, but what we did was we replaced every window and every door in the building.
It's that pot, yeah. Is it?
So what happens with that money is that actually rolls into the fund balance. So it's not unspent. It basically offsets our demand on the general state support grant. So our fund balance, if you look at it, is $3.4 million. So it's been growing. The numbers did increase significantly through COVID because we kept budgeting each year thinking everything was going to go back to normal, and it didn't. And then we had that huge influx of federal money. We're going to start seeing these numbers come down, which you can see from the budget of 25. Our fund balance roughly 4.4 million. It's down almost $1 million.
Can I ask a quick question about the fun stuff? Is there, being that has there ever been a conversation about sliding portions of that into kind of a higher income earning, a higher rate earning situation, giving the lack of frequency of dipping into it, right? Or
You could
ever,
certainly, we could reach out to the treasurer and have him, research and possibly look at investing that in higher yield CDs or something like that. Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Actually, no, I said I was gonna be quiet, but there was, back in 23, if you remember, we took $800,000 out of the fund balance and set that aside. That money is also just kind of sitting there on the balance sheet as a tax stabilization and or could be used for capital reserve. It's up to the board because we had that ballot article years ago that every year the board can look at what the fund balance is. Does it look like, hey, this might be the year we can sneak $200,000 out of it and set it aside for a rainy day? I don't think this budget's actually yielding that way, but that money's still there as well. All right.
Are you able to go to the spreadsheet? What I'm gonna call the spreadsheet.
The
Yeah.
tax copy?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
And are you able to show us what a 1% decrease would actually look like?
1% decrease.
If we were to find $250,000 to cut out,
Oh, yeah.
looking, and I'm specifically looking at, a combination of the transfers and the contingency fund, if we were to pull those out,
Yep.
what would that actually look like?
is this conversation worth having?
Yeah.
Not huge. So Bennington drops to increase of 1.3 cents. Pownell's down to 7.7 cents. Jacksbury about 4/10 of a penny.
Let's look at the 100,000 mark.
Oh, you want to see what you're,
Yeah, I think that's easier to realize. Bennington, you save yourself $6 on $100,000.
How does that change? Can you tell what that changes our per pupil? Does it change it at all?
yes. You dropped to 12,536 from
I'm saying 12.
12,6.
So no.
And at the end of the 11.1, does this bring us close to 10.5?
Your I was talking a percentage decrease on the education
We're giving-
side. I think it should be the same though. Spreadsheet, I keep throwing like.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, totally fine. I just want to make sure I'm taking that out before I start messing with something else.
Stephanie was talking, but we're not hearing her.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't
Oh,
mean
there you
to
go.
be.
That's easy.
I moved some papers and it picked up that sound.
Sorry, just bear with me for a moment on the fly here.
So Glenn, maybe you can answer this question while Renee's looking at that. The difference between the early education 3 number on the enrollment and the pre-K.
Brings us down to 10.3. 11.1 to 10.3 budget year.
Thank you for that.
And Sandy, I'm sorry, what was your
I
question?
was just curious, I don't know what early education 3 student is and a pre-K 3 student.
Early, so the EE is a student that's been identified as having, I don't know if it's necessarily
Needs.
considered an IEP at that point, but
Just,
yes.
okay, thank you. Are they at a school or are they mixed?
We have to service them.
Thank you.
At that age 3, you start servicing.
So IT stands for infant toddler, and those, yeah, I didn't know either.
Thanks, thank you.
Infant toddler, so they've been identified and are receiving services probably through the healthcare system, but as soon as they turn 3, they become our responsibility.
So they're I2 right now?
Yeah.
They're going to be 3?
Or younger.
So I know the impact isn't huge, but that impact is going to be very meaningful to some families. If we were to remove the $130,000 in transfer line 13, then reduce the line 12, the contingency down to $90,000, that would give us our 250. I don't know that that's terrible to say. Again, in the long run, it's not much, but every little bit helps.
And in theory, hopefully benefits drop next year. And health and salaries will drop because it goes to 3% next year.
Yep, right.
But then they go
Did
into a
did I not share the good news that, I noticed this as I was going through. So VHI, when they were presenting to us, said based on the usage and the cost, so on average, they are paying $6.4 million in claims per week for the state, for those of us that are participating. So we can expect a 15 to 17% increase in premiums annually at this rate.
at least it's not 15%.
So I think what's gonna happen is that because this is negotiated at the state level, they're gonna have to take a serious look at the format of these plans. They've become actually much more robust, and these were several years ago that they were trying to bring the cost down. So the exact opposite has happened, and so that's why the price is just.
They keep going up to, yeah.
So I know that you say it's not significant. I just feel that we need to keep the money for our schools. And I understand what you're saying, but feels that our elementary schools always tend to suffer a little bit more. It feels to me, coming from that. So I am okay with the way it is because of that. But I certainly understand that if the rest of the board felt the need to drop that amount, I respect that decision as well.
Mhm.
But I just hate to cut our elementary schools short. Sometimes it feels after we get the SU budget that that additional pressure on our schools feels real. I want our schools to know that we are doing what we can to support them as best as we can.
And I'm 100% with you on that, Sandy, which is why I think cutting these two items, I think works great because there will be no effect felt by anyone in our elementary schools, not staff nor students. This is money we set aside for that rainy day. Thankfully, we've been good about that. We've been responsible with that. So we have a lot in the rainy day fund already. And I think we can skip a year
Okay.
to relieve some of the burden on the taxpayers without affecting our schools at all.
Or you can look at salaries coming up next year, which you know, that 10% jump, you'll be closer to hopefully 5. I'm going to guess 5. We don't know.
I think next year, the salary line is going to be different. It's going to be lower because it's going, yeah.
This is a smaller jump, so if
Right.
we can save that million there and bring it to, half the money, we can replenish this fund and then fill.
I would think so.
I agree with Chris, let's reduce it this year and hopefully we can slide from that salary chunk next year.
And Director Gordon, so specifically what I had in mind was eliminating line 13, so bring that to 0, and then bring line 12 down to $90,000. Does that feel like the best way to cut $250,000?
I was just kind of spitballing for, I know, like, we tend to like to see, what is the amount that needs to get us to that one
Yeah.
percentage point or whatnot. So I figured those would be easy
I like that.
places, but
And you have very well informed spitballs. You're not some huckster off the street. You're direct report. You know what you're talking about.
I mean, just a table for the future. I don't know how these conversations, but I would be interested in having a conversation with the treasurer to like, what extra money do we have around and in conservative, not risky ways? Like you said, see, you know, can we get a little bit more out of this so that
That makes a lot of sense.
the only thing, I mean, I can share because I was the treasurer years ago, that this extra money that we have in the general fund is actually has helped us not have to borrow
Yeah.
money the last couple of years because it's been
you're talking about the 800,000, right?
all of it actually.
Including the reserve fund.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's all sitting in the general fund.
Okay.
What was happening in prior years and for most school districts,
Yeah.
where you start the year, you know, in the black, but then when schools open, taxes aren't collected until November. They don't get turned over to the schools until usually the end of November, beginning of December. So our cash is being depleted through the fall until that money comes in. And usually without this extra cash that we've had in years past, we've had to do tax anticipation borrowing. Bennington, I think we were in the neighborhood of $3 million, if I recall correctly. We were borrowing that much. So there was an expense
Yep.
associated with that to kind of bridge that gap until the money comes in, and then we're back in the black through the rest of the year. And then the cycle just starts all over. And unfortunately, it's just a function of the calendar. If taxes got collected at a different point in time or 2 points during the year, it wouldn't put a strain on the cash flow of school districts. So thankfully, the last few years, Mount Anthony and SVUESD have not had to borrow, but North Bennington has, Arlington has. So that money is helping just
Yeah.
sitting in the general fund. If you pull it, it may have a slight expense associated with it, but we do have a budget in there for short-term borrowing.
So is it also possible that the assessment doesn't get assessed until closer, you know, the one that we pay out to whatever, that first assessment?
I have made an adjustment to the assessments. They were heavier earlier in the year. And I said, as long as the SU has cash to operate, let's push that off.
Thank you.
And then those districts that are really in a pinch, like I'll try to hold those checks if I can. But unfortunately, the SU doesn't generate any money other than the money coming in from the assessments from the district, and then the cash coming in for reimbursements for census block grant, triple E. So
I just didn't know what the date was that you were anticipating that coming to.
usually it's a wash with the general state support grant payments coming in from the state are kind of the same time as the assessments go.
Okay,
So it's
thank you.
a little bit of a wash.
Any conversation with kind of your colleagues across the state about fixing the calendar, for lack of a better? I mean, I know there are a lot of moving parts connected to it, but I imagine other districts are in similar situation.
Probably more so a function of the municipalities
Yeah.
than us. And every town's different.
So are we good with, are we in agreements? Asking Director Gordon to make those adjustments that I described, bringing, on page 1, bringing line 13 down to 0, bringing line 12 down to 90? Any objections to that?
Would you like that motion?
Do we need that at this point, Director Gordon? Because we've not formally adopted anything yet.
If you do,
Yeah.
then I can have your warning ready for your meeting next week and then you're done.
All right. So,
Great idea.
so I would entertain a motion that we advance the budget that was presented to us tonight with the following adjustments: that line 13 on page 1 be reduced to 0, and that line 12 on page 1 be reduced to $90,000.
So that brings our budget to 33,128,598,
Is that what drops it to 10.3?
10.3. Yeah. And if you talk amongst yourselves for a moment, I might be able to get quick enough in the sheet to get it up here.
I think
But
it's
if you're ready
important.
to adjourn, have it.
it's important that we don't just accept 11%, that we need to do something because
Mhm.
personally, I really think that the state should take over more. It should not be on the taxpayers, the backside of the taxpayers. It's getting worse and worse. People are moving out of Vermont because they can't afford it. Now, the school tax alone was supposed to go up 18%. They got it down to 14.
Mhm.
And then we have the schools itself. So that's why I'm a little leery about higher percentage.
Sure. No, I agree.
I will say though, overall, our expenses are the same from when we were in New York and in Vermont. They just have different kind of balance. Some things a little bit more, some things a little bit less, but they are about the same. And New York passed this. There are other taxes that go up.
I think if you really look at like the home value assessment, you know, if I look at Shasbury, $30,000, you got a cost of the decrease at work. You know, $30 is less than 3% you'd have gotten.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's not much. 600 cans, I got 50 for the size of the road. Remember that thing. Hopefully we're gonna get everything done now.
So while Director Gordon's making those adjustments, had anyone made that motion that I suggested?
I mean, that vote.
Great, we'll call Glenn first and
And
we'll
I'll
second.
second it.
Thank you, Jeff. Any further discussion on that?
No.
So if Director Gordon is ready with the new figures. All right, so all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I was an I. I don't know if you could hear
I
me.
heard- Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
I didn't see your hand though.
Yeah.
Can't get my camera on.
I'm just kidding you, Steph.
No, I think it's probably because I still have the security settings.
Yeah,
So,
that's fine.
yeah, so
That's it.
there is the total, so that we can see that the transfers come down to 0. That contingency line becomes 90. Total budget's 33,128, 598. The only thing I'm a little leery to pull up is the tax calculation, because I don't know if I had put something else in there, but let's take a look.
In theory, that tax calculation could adjust a little more.
This is just an estimate at this point because we don't know where the legislature is gonna land on that yield number. But we do know that the CLAs are set. Yeah, unfortunately, the numbers are really low for some of our towns. But yes, so that's what you have, and I will get this cleaned up and get it posted. I can have it included in the next week's agenda. Just as a final.
And thank you for all the work on this. I know this is, you make it look very easy and very, you present it in a way that is easily digestible. And I know that has not always been the case with other folks in your position. You do a tremendous job on this. Thank you so much. Truly, truly.
I have a question. Do you think numbers when you sleep?
At this time of the year, yes.
You think about the beach. 30 days from now.
Screensaver, I feel like this is where I will be.
So great.
Should have the disconnects every budget.
Yes.
So folks, that exhausts our agenda and we would entertain a motion to adjourn, please. Thanks, Cindy. You have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Sandy. Very good. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? No, we're good. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.